So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Ivo Desmet, who obtained his PhD in 1984 from University of Leuven in Belgium, has been very active in the areas of cryptography and information security, currently holds a chaired position, the British Telecom Chair of Information Security at University College in London. It is a pleasure for us to have Ivo. Ivo has served on the program committees often as chair of the best conferences, and he serves on the editorial boards of also the best journals in information security. It's a great pleasure for us to have Ivo here, and he's going to talk about applying recreational mathematics to secure multi-party computation.
Thank you. So, some of this work has been funded by National Science Foundation. This work started roughly 3 years ago, and also by the British EPSRC, and also by several grants from the Australian ARC. And this is a joint work with my co-authors Joseph Pibrikzik, Ron Steinfeld, and Wozhong Wang. And parts of this presentation were given at Crypto 2007, appeared in the proceedings. So I'm going to start with talking about the classical mouse traveling through a maze. And you have all seen these pictures. And then I'm going to talk about a variant of this problem, which you could call a reliable variant. And then I'm going to talk about 3 types of solutions, how you could achieve this the reliable maze problem. And then I'm going to talk about applications. So sometimes people start with talking first about the applications and then actually how the solution is. But I think it's actually more fun to start with this the mouse traveling in a maze and then see some of the combinatorics and then afterwards see what the applications are. So that means that it might be of interest to a bigger audience than just people who work on information security. So one of the applications will be secure multi-party computation, and then I'm going to explain the link, how this recreational math actually is applicable in secure multi-party computation, and go through an informal way to the proof. And then I'm going to talk about open problems, which are basically all about this maze problem. This picture you have all seen. So you have a mouse, and the mouse basically lost something and wants to find the rabbit. And the question then is, how does the mouse is going to travel through the maze? You have all seen these pictures and similar pictures. And evidently, if you look at this as a planar graph on a grid, then computers can easily solve this problem using, for example, Dijkstra's shortest path algorithm. We are looking at the variant of the problem. And so we also are going to use a planar graph. But what we are going to do is we are going to color the vertices in this planar graph. And we demand reliability. That means that it is possible that some of the colors will disappear. The nodes just vanish. Okay? So it's possible that T colors are chosen, and then the vertices that have these T colors, all these vertices will be removed from the grid, and also their adjacent edges. And what we then want is that the mouse can still move from the top of the maze to the bottom of the maze, and from the left of the maze to the right of the maze. And that for any T possible colors that have been removed. And the size of this grid will be an M by M grid, and we don't require that there are actually nodes on each grid point. And if we have such a solution in which we use n different colors in total, which is reliable for the parameter T, that means we can remove all the nodes of up to T different colors, then we basically say that we have a T reliable n coloring for a planar graph with size parameter m. Let me give you an example. I first go to the example and then go back to the observation. So I'm going to talk about three types of solution to the problem. And the first one is what if t is small. And in that example, t is equal to 1 and n is equal to 3. So I'm going to go for there are three colors, and I may remove one color. And then the question is, can you move from the left to the right? And can you move from the top to the bottom? Let's look at that. Suppose I remove yellow. Then since this edge is, this node is both at the left side and on the top, this is very useful. And also this blue is at the bottom and at the right hand side, the rightmost column. So since only yellow is removed, you can move from the top to the bottom and also from the left to the right. So both conditions are satisfied. That's if yellow is removed. Let me now remove blue. If blue is removed, then you can move from the left to the right by going via the red. Okay? And that way you move from the left to the right. And this node is at the bottom, so you can also go from the bottom to the top. You can go left, right, and bottom to top. And that's via the red node. And by symmetry, if the red node is removed, you can remove at most one color, all the nodes of one color. Then by symmetry, it's also possible to achieve exactly the same. Observe that when you remove yellow, you remove both nodes because there are two nodes that have this yellow color. Okay? The example is clear for everybody? So now what you see is that in here, n is equal to 3. You can wonder whether it would be possible to do this for n equal to 2, or maybe even for n equal to 1, but n equal to 1 seems to be trivially impossible. But is it possible to do this for n equal to 2? And the answer is it's not possible. You need the total number of colors to be at least 2t plus 1 that you're going to use in this solution. And so let me point out to here. So this basically you could look at this as a grid. And suppose that we have n equal to 2t. Then we must be able to move from the left to the right. So now, then we must have, for any selection of the t colors, we must have a path that brings us from the left to the right, okay, which is free of the t colors that we chose. For any t colors, there must be such a path. So the number of colors that we are going to have on that path, since we have n equal to 2t, is at most t colors, because we want to be free of t colors. We have total 2t colors, so therefore we have at most t different colors on that path. What does that imply? That implies now, so now we have guaranteed left and right communication against these adversaries, but this communication is now impossible because the colors on that path have at most t colors. And so t people can basically cut all the communication from the top to the bottom. And so if you want to guarantee left to right and top to bottom at the same time, then you must have this n larger or equal than 2t plus 1. So that's very easy to prove. So we have a solution for t equal to 1, and I explained to you that n has to be at least 3, and so this is the optimal solution from n's viewpoint. I have another small example, and that t is equal to 2 and n is equal to 5. And by running through the conversion program, there is a 5 here, but that has been erased. Sorry for that, okay? So software apparently is not always perfect. The colors are not colors here. I just put them as numbers. And so I claim that any two colors that you choose, t is equal to 2, you will be able to go from the top to the bottom and from the left to the right. Suppose I'm going to remove the colors the 2 and 3. How can I now move from the top to the bottom, that's actually very easy because I would take 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. So that's, I can go easily from the top to the bottom. And also, if I would had 2 and 3 as the bad guys, then I can actually also achieve it this way. So you could wonder whether they would always be horizontal or vertical paths, and the answer is no. So suppose I would choose as bad ones 1 and 2, then the remaining colors that I can use are 3, 4 and 5. How can I go from the top to the bottom? So the only colors I'm allowed to use is 3, 4 and 5. So I could start from here, go down here, and then take an angle here and continue. And so I can go here from 3 to 3 here, and I have not used 1 and 2. So that's possible. And now how do I go from left to right? Then I have to avoid 1 and 2, and you see there is also a solution that brings me from the left to the right. And you can exhaustively try all the possible the selections of 2 colors, and you will always be able in this grid to move from the top to the bottom and from the left to the right. Those of you who have been following the research on tiles, there's a lot of research on tiles that has been done. Some of it has been mentioned in Scientific American. We have tried to use it, but so far we haven't been successful. It looks as one of these famous tiles, and I don't know whether you're a fan of bathroom tiles, but this is some of the patterns that you sometimes see in bathrooms. How far will it bring us in general? We have no clue. So, so far, those we have them for small examples. We also were able to generate variants of this for bigger T's, but not really a general case. So I mentioned you before, we have 3 types of solution. One is when T is small. And so the question is there a construction that works for n exactly equal to 2t plus 1, which we know is basically a lower bound? We need at least 2t plus 1 colors. Is that possible? And the answer is yes, we have a solution. And I'm going to illustrate the solution. So what we are going to do is we are going to list all the combinations, or you could call them subsets, with 2 colors out of the 5 colors. So for example, this is the colors 1 and 2. These are the colors 1 and 3, and we see that we have a total of 10, which is 5 choose 2 columns, and we have exactly the same number of rows. What does 1, 2 mean here? 1, 2 means that this column has to be free of the colors 1 and 2. Okay? And also on the row side, we also put such a label, and that means that this row has to be free of 1 and 2. And now, what we are going to require is that evidently the row has to be free of 1 and 2, and here the column has to be free of 1 and 4. That means that what we could put here is 3 or 5. Those are the 2 choices. But if you look not at 1, 4, but if you look here at 1, 4, and then here at 2, 3, 5 is the only solution that you can have, because here this row is forbidden to have 1, 4. This column is forbidden to have 2, 3. That means that only one left over is 5. And so what we're going to have, here we're going to forbid 2 colors for the row. Here we're going to forbid 2 colors for the column. That means that whatever you're going to choose, there will be at least 1 element that remains over, and that's the element that you put exactly at the crossing. And so that shows that there is a solution for this, the basically maze in which you want to communicate, even if T colors have been removed from left to right and from bottom to the top to bottom. And the problem evidently is that this is exponential in the T. So it's not the nicest solution, but it shows that exists a solution which is optimal in n. So in which you can achieve the smallest n. So this is another way to actually look at it. And when you look at it with colors, humans are much better to look at colors than looking at numbers. And you see there's a lot of repetition there. All this red area here, it just basically put this rotated. So it's the communication this way and this way which you want to do. There's a lot of red there. We have tried to use that, but didn't bring us far in a general construction. So the best what we have when we want to have an optimal n, an n as small as possible, is the exponential solution in the size of this grid. Can we do better? Yeah, we can do better. If we increase the n, if we don't go for an optimal n, but if we let n go larger than 2.948 times t, and we choose the colors randomly, then actually m can be linear in t. And the detailed proof I'm not going to go over. It basically uses transition diagrams and eigenvalues, and with that we compute 2.948, and we prove that if you want that the probability that the resulting color is not satisfactory to be very small, let's say delta, then this 2.948 guarantees that this will be the case. So for your delta that you choose, there will be a solution. For certain delta, there will be a value which is linear in t, and then when you choose that m and you randomly choose the colors, then the probability that this is not satisfactory is only going to be delta. Okay? So you could say 2.948 is very close to 3. Yeah, not for people working in reliability. This is a big difference between 3 and 2. And so we want to make that gap smaller. So this is not deterministic construction. It's a probabilistic construction, random. And we don't achieve the optimal n, but the size of the grid is polynomial in t. So those are 3 different constructions that we have. So now you could wonder, what are the applications of that? An obvious application is that you have a sender somewhere here, a receiver somewhere here, a sender on the left and a receiver on the right. This guy wants to communicate to this guy, and this guy wants to communicate to that guy. And you want now to have a reliable network in the middle. A reliable network means that it might be that certain nodes just die. Okay? I'm taking the case not that they're going to be Byzantine, they're going to be active. They just either are there or they die. So that case corresponds to what I was talking before, when you have certain platforms. You could, for example, think about Cisco routers, and somebody finds a problem with Cisco routers and is able to shut them down. But maybe there are other routers, that platforms that a hacker can succeed in attacking, and using worms, you can basically replicate the attack. So a weakness on one computer is basically a weakness on a platform. And that means that if you give all the platforms the same color, that then you can shut them all down. However, it's not a really nice application. Why not? It's a nice application, but there is an easy solution for if you don't require a planar graph. So it's a rather trivial solution if you don't require a planar graph. So why would we require a planar graph in this case? There's no reason for that. So this is just a nice example. Actually, this was first studied in this context, not for the computation, and afterwards we looked at the planar aspect. So the planar aspect comes from secure multiparty computation. So what is secure multiparty computation? Those of you who work on recreational mathematics may not know what secure multiparty computation is. Let me explain that to you. Suppose that you are going to a medical doctor in Iraq. The question is who to trust. Okay? And the answer is we don't know. We don't trust anybody in Iraq. So, but you have, suppose you're there and you get sick and you have to go to the medical doctor. What are you going to do? The typical solution is you go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, I'm going to prescribe you a medication. But that medication may be counterindicated because you may have an allergy, or you may take some other medication that reacts with the one that is going to be prescribed, or you may have a health condition or whatever where this medication is going to make it worse. So the typical solution, which is often used in distributed databases, is that the local doctor gets all the data from all the databases and now gets your full medical record in Iraq. Are you sure you want to do that? I think the answer is no. You don't want to give a doctor in Iraq all your medical data. So what's the solution? The solution is that the medical doctor in Iraq should only learn whether this medication can be prescribed or not without knowing why. And that's basically what's going to happen. So you have all these distributed databases. The medical doctor will contact them in Iraq. There will be a computation that takes place. At the end of the computation, the medical doctor learns yes or no. The one in Iraq, it just learns. You can or you cannot prescribe that. Okay? So that's basically an application of secure multi-party computation. I don't want to go to the whole formalism of defining it, but just getting this answer is the essence, without revealing anything else, without the doctor in Iraq learning anything else about your medical history, then the outcome that this medication can be prescribed or medication cannot be prescribed. If the medication cannot be prescribed, he may learn a little bit or she may learn a little bit about your medical history. But that's the only thing from just the outcome. But that's the only thing that you want to leak and nothing more. You don't want your whole dossier to leak. So that's an application of secure multi-party computation. So now if you look at most research that has been done in that area, you're going to map your function in multiple variables. You're going to map that into a Boolean circuit. And there you immediately make it in practice very, very slow. So you make that immediately impractical. And so therefore people have been looking at, can you actually avoid doing that mapping? And in certain cases you can. So for example, people have looked at, can you do black box computation in a ring in which you don't know in advance what ring will be used, but you want to build secure multi-party computation without knowing in advance what ring is going to be used. So we are doing something similar. We have n parties, and they want to compute the product of their secrets without leaking anything that does not follow trivially from the product. And we want to protect against T passive eavesdroppers. And our elements are going to belong to a non-abelian group. Okay? Our solution is black box in the sense that we want our solution to be independent of the actual non-abelian group. And this is application to threshold block ciphers and to post-quantum crypto. So what happens is that with discrete log and the factoring broken, if quantum computers can be built, people now don't trust abelian cryptography anymore. And so some people don't trust abelian cryptography anymore, to be more precise. And so what happens, people now are proposing non-abelian solutions. And some of them have been broken, etc., etc. So since most of the work has been done on the abelian one, it makes no sense with post-quantum crypto to think about non-abelian. Another one is if you want to compute a block cipher, but you don't want a single person to have the key and you want to share the key among n parties, then can you actually decrypt, the decryption is basically a permutation, can you actually decrypt the ciphertext using your share? So that's another application. So there are two applications of this issue. So the issue is n parties have a secret. That secret is an element of a non-abelian group. They want to compose it, and you want that only the result is going to leak, only the product, and anything that trivially follows from the product, evidently, but nothing more. And T people cannot learn anything about the actual inputs. And there is a preliminary result, and the preliminary result follows from the work that was done by Kuжилevitz, and it follows that n has to be larger or equal than 2t plus 1. If the group is abelian, that's not the case. If the group is abelian, t plus 1 is sufficient. So the non-abelian aspect of this makes this immediately go the n to be bigger. The number of parties that you need, when t is given, you say so many parties you don't trust, has to be basically the 2t plus 1. So the bad guys have to be a minority, while in the case of an abelian group, n can be just one more than the bad guys. And how is this proven? It's proven by demonstrating that there is no two-party protocol to compute the commutator of their secrets. For those of you who haven't had enough algebra to understand what commutator is, it's written there. You basically have one element, which is raised to the minus 1. Then you multiply it with the second to the minus 1. and then you multiply again with the first, and then again with the second. Okay? So that's basically the commutator of their secrets. So the first party has x1, the second party has x2, and then once you demonstrate that you cannot do this two-party computation, then you jiggle with this, and then you can extend that to demonstrate that you cannot do the party computation except if n is larger or equal to 2t plus 1. So how are we going to do that? We're going to look at the whole execution as an execution tree, which we're basically going to work out in detail. And so we're going to privately compute the product of x1 over x7, and we're going to use sharing. But there's going to be a big difference. The usual way that people do sharing is they do t out of n sharing. And then they continue the t out of n sharing. But the problem is nobody knows how to make an efficient scheme for t out of n sharing with non-abelian groups. And then the problem is, how do you now multiply these things, these shares? And so we stay completely away from that. So we are never going to use a t out of n secret sharing. Nevertheless, we have to be able. We try to do it first without using secret sharing. And for small t, we actually were able to find solutions, very complex solutions, where somebody is going to multiply with random here and somebody else is going to multiply with random there. But we couldn't generalize that. So it only worked for small examples. T equal to 2, we found a solution. T equal to 3, we found a solution. And that's it. And then we had to give up. So we maybe said, oh, if you spend another year on it, we may find t equal to 4. But let's try to generalize it. And so what we do is we basically write this multiplication as basically a tree, which is basically each leaf, you have the element in here, x1, x2, all the secrets, and then you're going to do the product, and then the product here, and then you do the product of the products, etc. But now, instead of doing a product, what's going to happen is that this value that each party has, for example, x1 party 1 has, x2 party 2 has, etc., that's going to be shared out. And so this x5 will be inputted as shares here in a subprotocol. And this x6 will be inputted as shares. Okay? And then an output will be, and that output is a bunch of shares. And then afterwards, we will continue with the shares here, and also will continue with shares here. That's similar as in the traditional secure multi-party computation. The only difference is that we're not going to use t out of n secret sharing schemes, because then we're stuck. So when we plug this thing in, then what we obtain, this will also be parties that are going to appear. So we're going to also have in there a graph in which parties are going to occur. So what we're going to do is that the nodes correspond to the step in the distribution protocol. So it will be executed before this will be executed. So this is similar to basically an execution tree. And what now happens is that the nodes that execute that, they will correspond to parties, and we color the nodes. So the color indicates which party is going to do that. So if a party, let's say party 3 is involved here and party 3 is involved there, that party 3 will appear twice, and that's why we will put a color there for that party 3, and that will appear here in that subprotocol, and it will appear there in that subprotocol. I hope that's clear for everybody. So now what are the tools that we use to build the shared 2 subprotocol? So we basically have here a shared 2 subprotocol, and then we continue with this shared sub 2 protocol. So the x and y inputs are split into m shares. On the slide it says capital L, it's the same notation as the L, it's just that we use 2 symbols for the same, unfortunately. Inside the subprotocol, we don't use t out of n schemes. We use only k out of k, and that's very easy to do, because what you're going to do is you're just going to choose k minus 1 random elements, and then you're going to choose the kth one, so that the product of it gives you some secret. Okay? And that secret may be a local secret local to the subprotocol. And what's k in the subprotocol? K is the out degree of the internal node. And we illustrate this as this. So this is a subprotocol. Here are the shares for x. Here are the shares for y. And as you see, so there's an arrow coming in here. So if you look at the original grid, there was no direction here. There was basically a planar graph, but not a directed graph. This is a directed graph that indicates where the input goes and where the output goes. So those are all input nodes on the top level. And here in the right column, all those are inputs. So you see this input come here. You may not necessarily continue here with inputs. This is a more general one than the grid I explained. And then here you have output nodes, and there you have the outputs. What happens in this node? What happens is that all the values in the incoming ones, they will all be multiplied together. And then from that result, it will be shared out by k out of k, where k is the out degree. So you definitely have to do this if you do it on one row to make sense, so that you start from here to here. You cannot go in two directions because otherwise it would make sense. You have to be careful with that, but it's not too difficult to make sure that everything makes sense here. You are not allowed to have crossing edges. And the reason why you cannot allow crossing edges is that if you would have a crossing edge, it would be that you would have A, B, C, and then the C and the A would basically commute, and they don't necessarily in a non-abelian group. And so that's why, due to that, that imposes the planarity of this graph. Okay, that's why it has to be planar. And so then what's happening is that this is computed, and the colors that are going to be used here indicate which party is going to do this. And then at the end, this is going, the last ones here, this will be outputs, they're basically output shares, and they will then be used in the next subprotocol. So now there are some conditions. It turned out that the results that were done by myself, Wang and Burmester, in a communication context, the context of reliable and private computation, are useful here. So we get this unexpected thing, because what happens is historically all this research from communication came out of the research of multi-party computation, and now we have gone full circle and we are back at secure multi-party computation. So this time research on secure communication influences research on secure computation. So from that it follows that the privacy issue, so how to guarantee that a conspiracy of T parties don't learn anything else than just the output, that corresponds to a communication in a reliability communication issue, but not a reliability against active adversaries, but a reliability against the removal of these T colors. Okay? And then once you see that, then everything basically is much easier to express in this reliability issue than actually in the privacy issue, and you can abstract all this away, which makes it much easier to actually think about that. What you also have to see is that if the shares of X and the shares of Y have to be multiplied, even if T nodes are removed, then you have to guarantee that that happens, that this multiplication does happen. So let's go back to the previous one. So suppose a certain number of nodes are removed, then some here is going to continue. You have to make sure that this is going to be multiplied with some of these. So suppose that this would go this way, and that would go this way, then you're never going to have a multiplication of an X share with a Y share if T colors are removed. So for any T colors that are removed, the path that brings you from the top to the bottom and from here to the bottom have to move to meet. But if you now require that that path goes this way, from the right to the left, we all know crossings, when we go across the road, then they will meet. Okay? And so that's illustrated here, where we see that we now have a path that goes from here to the bottom, and a path that has to go from here to the bottom. But by requiring that it can go all the way to here, they actually interchange here, they cross each other there, and that's why there will be an actual multiplication of a share of X and a share of Y, regardless who the bad guys are, and then they will go to the same output. That crossing is important because otherwise we cannot guarantee the privacy, or in the reliability context, we don't get this actual multiplication to take place. So in the case that I explained to you before about this maze, where the mouse can go vertically and horizontally, since they will meet somewhere, then that guarantees that instead of going from here to here, that you actually can go that direction. And then that can be used, because if you look back at here, you see the actual outputs in the actual protocols are only going to be at the bottom. There are no outputs here. There are no outputs. This is just all internal computation. Okay, internal computation where everything that you receive as incoming edges is all multiplied, all the values, and then shared out using a k out of k, where k is the out degree of that node. It's only here that some of those edges are going to go to the outside. So, what now happens is that this is only a subprotocol. We may not forget that this is only a subprotocol. That in reality, we are working with this. So now, if we are removing T colors, we remove T colors here in this subprotocol, in this subprotocol, in this subprotocol, in this subprotocol, and in this, all these subprotocols. And what we have to guarantee that there are still paths from all these the access to the output. How do we guarantee that? For that we have to guarantee that the complete graph remains connected. And how do we do that? That's very easy to do. We put an extra condition in. And the extra condition basically says that when you have an input coming here, the output also has to occur there exactly at the same place. Because then by recursion, you can guarantee that that one will be able to continue working and that the whole thing will actually work. So, what's going to happen for that one here is if we look at the maze problem, the first maze problem, there was not a condition. So you could have an input here that outputs there. But by basically making the mirror image and attaching it to it, you now automatically guarantee that when you input here, you will output there. So you make with that the solution a little bit bigger. It's no longer a square, but it solves the problem which we need, that the input here has to be the same output there in order to allow this protocol to continue working. So, one can formally then prove that this implies the privacy condition. And that has been explained in the proceedings of Crypto 2007. So, when you now look at it, is when you actually look at all this, then you see that everything in here is directed graph. But when you then analyze the conditions, they end up as conditions that you have to be able in this one to move. A sufficient condition is that you move from the right to the left column, from the most right to the most left, and from the top row to the bottom row. That's the condition. And evidently in that condition, the arrows don't play a role. And that's why we originally started by explaining all this in the undirected planar graph. Okay? The way it's used is not an undirected one, because we have to be able to distinguish between incoming data in a node and outgoing one. And that's why we have these arrows. But the arrows come kind of natural. So going from the undirected to the directed and vice versa is not a problem. So, what does the work imply for open problems? There are several things that it implies for open problem. Can this be extended to active adversaries? So what usually happens with active adversaries is that so for those of you who are not familiar with that, so what happened in all this computation is that we assume, if you look at here a certain node, what this node is going to do, if it's not removed means that it may have been a privacy violation. In reality, no nodes are removed. What happens is that due to the work that I mentioned of myself, Wang and Burmester, there is an equivalence between removing nodes and privacy. So the privacy condition, when you run this protocol, all nodes are present. Okay? The ones that we virtually remove are the ones that we view as the potential eavesdroppers. It's an equivalence. It's a mathematical equivalence. And it's much easier to think about graphs in which you remove nodes and basically saying those are potential eavesdroppers. And this equivalence is very important. So, this node here basically will compute with the incoming ones. They will multiply them and then share this out. So the question now is, if you're dealing with an active adversary, that active adversary may actually stop working and decide not to do this, decide not to send anything. If you run this on this protocol, the whole thing is just going boom, down, it fails, okay? Because this thing assumes that all the nodes will do their work. They may be eavesdropping, which virtually or logically corresponds to studying it as if these nodes are removed in this graph. Okay? But that's just a virtual world. When you run the protocol, the actual nodes are not removed. That's why it's called a passive eavesdropper. A passive eavesdropper means that each node will do the work as if it's supposed to do, but may try to learn some secret. So some people therefore call it semi-honest. I personally don't like the name semi-honest. I mean, you're either honest or you're not, okay? How can you be semi-honest? But semi-honest with that, they mean that you're only interested in learning the secret, but you will follow the protocol as prescribed. Okay? When you're supposed to share something out, you will share it out. So I prefer, therefore, the name passive adversary. In the case of an active adversary, in the real case, when you really run this protocol, that node may decide to do nothing. And then the whole thing collapses, because then your computation is not going to be evaluated. A nice way to look at this is that if you look at this thing here, in the beginning, if you multiply all the shares together, you get x. If you multiply all the shares together, you get y. And then it's not too difficult to see that basically you're going to maintain this, and at the end, what you're going to obtain is basically, if you multiply all these things, it's going to be nothing else than the product of x and the product of y. Okay? And that's the trick. And in order to maintain that, to guarantee that, that's why we cannot have edges that cross, because we don't know how the elements don't commute. So that's one problem if we go from passive adversary to active adversary. Another problem is that maybe the node, so if you look at the original thing, this x comes from one participant, from the sixth participant. It's the sixth participant who's going to give the shares to here. But maybe the sixth participant has not given these shares consistently. And maybe this does not correspond to what it should be. So, and that may happen here also. There may be one of the parties that lie, that compute this and give an incorrect result at the end. So then, that's going to imply, trivially, that when you do nothing else than multiplication and sharing, that the result will be incorrect. So, in an active eavesdropper case, you want to guarantee that when you have the active participants, that then you can still compute the correct solution. And it's well known that if for a passive solution you need 2t plus 1 nodes in total, that if you're dealing with an active adversary, you need 3t plus 1. So the n has to go up. So when n is going to go up, it seems that we have to use some t out of n secret sharing scheme. But we are not sure of that. So the active case seems far from trivial. In the case of the communication one has looked at active one, and we have solutions for the active one for communication, but it's not clear how to translate that to the computation problem. So that's one open problem. Can this be used? And then the next open problem, which has nothing to do with secure multiparty computation, is there an efficient solution, a polynomial size solution for n equal to 2t plus 1? And that's basically this maze problem, where you have this maze in which the vertices are colored, or planar graph in general, where you have m nodes at the top, m nodes at the bottom, m at the left, and m at the right. You may generalize it that you have m here at the top, m at the bottom, m prime at the right, and m prime at the left. There's some variants you can use. Is there a solution in which n is 2t plus 1 and the size is polynomial? Now, it's important to realize that it doesn't need to be a square as here. That's basically a square solution. You could have a solution which looks more as a rectangle in which you put the one besides the other. Because that's what happens in reality. We don't actually use the output of this, the left output of this square. But then you have to be very careful, because then you have to guarantee that the output here from the x is going to be at the same place here, and that the output, the input here from the y will meet for whatever t you're going to have, that they will actually meet, so that you can guarantee that the product will be computed. So, but it seems from our simulation that we have done by computer that this case is easier. We don't know that for sure. Okay, so it might be easier to look at this problem instead of the maze one. So why did we look at the maze one? The reason we look at this, the basically two-dimensional maze one, where you have the communication in vertical and horizontal way. The path itself may not be the vertical or horizontal, it may go up and down. The reason why we looked at that is that we found a solution, exponential size solution, for which it worked. And for small t, we also found nice solutions, which is nice tiles. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the tile-based solution is what we actually need to have. So that is an open problem. Evidently, we are also trying to solve that, but we may not succeed. I mean, you know, once you have a paper published, somebody else may beat you at solving your own open problem. And so the next question, which I already asked, is does the rectangular approach have advantages over the square one? So I was asked to allow for a certain time for questions, so I'm doing that. And so during the question time, I'm just going to put this tile solution there, which is actually not in the crypto paper. This tile solution was found during the summer of this year while I was visiting Australia. And it's not clear whether this can be generalized for bigger t. Any questions? Yes?
So it's not a question, it's a comment. You might want to check this may have consequences in a certain kind of literature.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
The following one. There are maze pursuit evasion games where the mouse is trying to escape. So this time the mouse wants to escape. Mm-hmm. And the nodes are either empty or they have a policeman or something. And up to t of the police may be corrupted by the mouse, but you don't know which ones. And so on. So there are, you know.
Is this the work which was done by Svigalil and Matt Franklin and
Motoyun? No, it's a different community from ours. They don't publish in the same journals that we do. I ran into this accidentally a few years ago. They publish in different journals. It's just like they have their own group. They produce their own PhD students, and they are in a world of their own. But this may have consequences.
Yes, this may have consequences.
In their world. But yes. It's a little bit the jewel of it, because you know, you want to stop the mouse from escaping. Your strategy has to stop the mouse from escaping. Yes. I don't know how much.
It might be worth looking, and so that's why I gave it a title which is basically more general, and spoke about recreational math instead of just secure multi-party computation over a non-abelian group, because it may not necessarily get the attention of the communities that actually may have done work that may be useful. So thank you for your comment. If you have some pointer,
I would appreciate actually a specific reference. I will email you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Let's thank the speaker then.
Thank you.
Everyone sign in?